orcs, vampires, beholders, your mom. These are just some of the legendary monsters that have left their mark on D&D over the decades. They are monsters that are so popular they have entire encounters and campaigns designed around them, and people outside the hobby are probably familiar with them as well. But there's been a lot of monsters over the decades, hasn't there? Thousands of creatures from supplements and campaign settings, some of which never even made it to later editions. Like this guy. And this is a video arguing for the return of this guy. But it is also a top 10 list. 10 monsters in 5th edition that I think are overlooked. If you're a rookie player, there might be some you've never even heard of. And if you're a veteran, there might be a few that you've glanced at once or twice, or perhaps even run at your own table and not really seen the appeal of. This is your hand if you don't watch the rest of this video. But these are creatures that I think have a lot to offer to your table. So in addition to this list of 10, I am also going to be providing 10 encounters that can go with each of them to utilize them to their full potential. So here it is. 10 weird ghasts, ghouls, and little guys that you may have overlooked what they can offer to your table, either as an epic boss battle, a random encounter, a little bit of flavor, or even a potential ally. Let's get into it. At the number 10 spot, we have the Carrion Crawler. This is a challenge rating 2 unaligned monstrosity, typically found in the Underdark. In real life, there's nothing I fear more than an insect that just has too many legs. What business do they have with all of those legs? So when I'm running a creepy crawly dungeon in my D&D game, the Carrion Crawler is one of my go-tos for adding just a little bit of flavor, tension, and panache. The Carrion Crawler is a simple-minded creature that lurks anywhere where death is common. They can follow the stench of death for many miles, hunting down scenes where there's been combat and cleaning up the mess, or if they're particularly hungry, waiting in the shadows to surprise their next meal. In addition to having too many legs, they also have tentacles on their mouth. Gross. And these tentacles can paralyze and poison the victim. Using this poison, they're able to quickly ambush, snatch away, and bring their next meal to a hiding spot, where they will then go in for the kill. An encounter with a Carrion Crawler, especially at low levels, can be just as much about the anticipation and dread of the ambush as it is the ambush itself. You hear it skittering along the walls, but then don't see anything there. You see a silhouette in the shadows that slowly starts to move, until finally, somebody in the party is descended upon. But the appeal of the Carrion Crawler does not end at low levels. In mid or high level play, they can also add quite a thrill as a third party in a different conflict. Remember that Carrion Crawlers are attracted to the scent of death from far, far away, so the first time that blood is drawn in the dungeon, whatever is the main theme of the dungeon and whatever your players are doing, they might start heading in. And by the time they get to the final boss encounter of that dungeon, perhaps they're hanging out on the walls and coming in between cracks, just waiting to make a strike against anybody that goes down. They can certainly add thrill if they paralyze either the players or the enemy team, and it can add a lot of dread to hitting 0 HP if they know that the Carrion Crawlers are waiting for somebody to drop so they can carry them and take them away. This can also lead to a frantic chase and rescue mission of sorts as the Carrion Crawler starts to run away with a paralyzed victim. And keep in mind, they have many legs, so they're pretty fast. Now, I put these at number 10 on the list because they're fairly simple. There's only so much mileage you can get out of a Intelligence 1 creature whose sole purpose in life is to eat. They're certainly not going to be the big bad anytime soon. But I still think these creatures are worth bringing up because of how much they shine as a natural hazard in an already dangerous area. A neutral party that is on no one's side that can add a lot of chaos to an already exciting dungeon crawl. So, I think the best way to use these in an encounter is to lean into their ability to smell blood and death. Foreshadow them the first time that there is bloodshed in your dungeon encounter. Have them creeping along the walls, but not directly engaging in combat as the story progresses. And then finally, unleash them as a neutral, violent third party willing to eat whoever they can in a different fight, with a bandit leader or a traditional boss monster, or whatever you may have. When at any moment somebody can be paralyzed and carried away by a terrible many-legged creature, your combat encounter will become much more strategic and much more deadly. Number 9, the Slithering Tracker. This is a CR3 chaotic evil ooze that is typically found in the Underdark. Slithering trackers are creatures created deliberately by the body that they used to inhabit. Somebody who is hell-bent on revenge can turn to magical powers that be to kill them, suck all of the moisture out of their body, and turn it into a primordial oozy snake with one purpose and one purpose only: to choke out the life of those who wronged it. But if a slithering tracker survives its quest for revenge, it will eventually realize that it is trapped in its own form for eternity, and will probably go mad. At this point, they either roam aimlessly, taking out petty vengeance on anything, or they rejoin the legion that created them and become minions. Much like our previous entry, the thrill of this creature showing up is half of the fun, and once they do, they are quite the tricky opponent. For one, their form allows them to hide very well amongst bodies of water. And for two, they boast a lot of damage resistances and condition immunities, something that begs the party to figure out how best to fight it and to approach it strategically. Most significantly, their Life Leech ability allows them to grapple onto a party member and share damage dealt with them, meaning that the party will have to determine whether or not they should attempt to break this grapple or just attack it outright and deal a bunch of damage to the slithering tracker and the poor party member that it has grabbed onto. And on top of all of that, the slithering tracker also has something that I don't think I see enough in D&D monsters: damage vulnerabilities. This creature is vulnerable to both cold and fire damage, which I think implies that you can either freeze it to death or heat it up until it turns into steam. Either way, I think it's very cool whenever monsters have these, because they add a little bit of a puzzle element to the encounter. They add the satisfaction of your players figuring out what it's vulnerable to. And it allows you as the DM to play a little bit of hardball, throw your party into something that it seems like they can't handle at first until they figure out the trick, and suddenly the tide has turned in their favor. I also think you should not hint as to how many are there at the beginning of the encounter, only for them to discover more in hiding as they try to cross these bodies of water. And if you want to be extra devious, you can even throw important loot, or perhaps even essential items to get through the dungeon, at the bottom of the bodies of water, forcing them to swim down to where the slithering tracker will be able to fight them best. Number 8 is the Thri-kreen, a CR1 chaotic neutral humanoid typically found in the desert. Now, I know it's weird to consider the Thri-kreen overlooked or underrated, considering they've been in the game for decades, and in earlier editions, they were even a supported playable race. However, I will stand by the fact that they are overlooked in D&D 5e simply because of the plethora of opportunities they offer for world building, flavor, and even potential allies. And I think simply reframing how we look at the Thri-kreen from combat monsters to a potential social monster can add a lot of depth to this as well. Thri-kreen are mantis-like people who typically are isolationist. They stay far away from other cultures and can be seen walking in perfectly straight lines along the horizon. Typically, they will only approach the players if they're trying to eat them, or if they have a specific request. There's a language barrier baked into the physicality of the Thri-kreen that I find very interesting. Not only is Thri-kreen its own language, and most of them aren't going to know the common tongue, but they don't have a tongue. They have antennae and mandibles that they use to speak their language, meaning that even if they're trying to get along with the players, that inherent communication barrier could present some challenges and add flavor to the encounter in and of itself. And in some special cases, Thri-kreen have an innate ability for psionics, which of course would allow them to communicate telepathically with the party. But I like to believe that because of its rarity, this is kind of an exception as opposed to the rule, something that is seen as an honor and something that they wouldn't just offer to the players willy-nilly. Now, as far as combat abilities go, admittedly, the Thri-kreen are pretty basic. They've got camouflage, they've got a big jump distance they can use, they've got a couple of interesting weapons, but I think that this social element is really what makes them shine, and what a dungeon master should lean into if they're considering using Thri-kreen. For an encounter, I would have players stumble into Thri-kreen territory unknowingly and get held at spear point by a group, recognizing that they're just interrogating them without immediately initiating combat. From here, communication can be attempted. The players can come up with clever ways to try to speak non-verbally to the Thri-Kreen in order to let them know that they're not a threat. And from here, perhaps the Thri-Kreen can let them through or even become potential allies for later in the story. Regardless of how you use these little guys, they add a lot of much-needed mystery and nuance and life to the underutilized and barren setting of the desert. At number 7, we have the Flumph, a CR 1/8 lawful good aberration typically found in the Underdark. The Flumph are a rather peaceful species, especially considering the terrain that they inhabit, and adorably, they are named after the sound that their little air tubes make when they jet themselves around. Flum, 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 flum. You get it? They are also psionics and capable of telepathy, and this is how they primarily talk to each other, and they are quite learned folk. Flumph are known to be very interested in humanities, sciences, history, and philosophy, and if the party is non-threatening and they can sense that they are good aligned, they will often entertain their company just to hold these conversations and gain as much knowledge as possible. And speaking of such, emotional intent and inner thought is something that the Flumph are very attuned to. For one, their own body color changes depending on their emotional state, and for two, psionic energy is actually their main source of food. Combat-wise, these creatures are notoriously vulnerable. Their tendrils and stink cloud abilities will hardly do anything to a player past level 1, and when knocked down, they even have an opportunity of turtling upside down and having trouble getting themselves up. They are not a hardy species for sure. Typically, they subsist as a parasitic species. They live nearby illithids or githyanki or aboleths or other intelligent creatures of the Underdark and siphon off a bit of their mental energy for food as a way to subsist. If done right, they're never noticed, and they never bother the mental faculties of the creatures they're eating from. And I think this makes them a natural ally to a party that's in the Underdark. Yes, I think if you're using Flumph at your table, they should be an ally to the party, not an enemy. You absolute monster. Why are you thinking about hurting them? Why? Why? First, you can introduce the Flumph to the party because the Flumph will seek them out, sensing that they have knowledge and good intentions and wanting to learn from them. And from here, the party can realize that these Flumph have a lot of knowledge about the actual enemy that the party is after. Any of those creatures we mentioned before, Mind Flayers, Aboleth, etc. From here, the party can request that the Flumph use their natural psionic abilities to do a bit of recon with them. Maybe they can bring a few Flumph along and try to keep them safe while they gain intelligence on the Mind Flayer ship or Githyanki camp or what have you, before hopefully safely getting them back. And this could lead to interesting implications in the future, where the party has to decide if the risk of the Flumph getting caught is worth continually putting them in danger to gain information. Perhaps they can be a continued ally throughout the campaign. Whatever you do with them, just don't hurt them. You monster. Number 6, we have the At-Yug, a CR5 neutral-aligned aberration that is also typically found in the Underdark. These are 3-legged, tentacle-eyed, telepathic alien trash dogs. I don't think I need to say anymore, but I will for about 90 seconds. These creatures have a strong aversion to light, like to hang out in piles of garbage, and are typically only seen when they're looking for a meal. But unlike our carrion crawlers earlier on the list with an intelligence score of 1, the At-Yug has a few more tricks up its sleeve, ways that it can lure in prey when it chooses to, and even have somewhat meaningful interactions with the party if the story goes that way. I have the At-Yug on this list because I think it shines equally as an ally and as an enemy, and there are very few creatures that I think could really nail it at being both, and offer such a different experience as both. As an ally, the At-Yug are sometimes kept as guard dogs or garbage disposals, as they will get rid of just about anything their caretakers want them to. As long as they are well fed, they typically present no threat, and as long as the party can keep up with that pace, they now have a reliable, combat-hardy companion. As an ally, they also will attend Pride. As an enemy, their telepathy can be used to manipulate the party. Their bite attack has a disease condition it can afflict that has an interesting ability where it affects your maximum HP. And they also have this really fun slam ability where they can pick you up with their tentacles and throw you around, either into walls or into each other. So yeah, what more do you want? Alien tentacle dog that can throw you around and eats garbage. This is the ALF of D&D, and it should be in every campaign, thank you.
I'm proud of you, Mark. You get it 90 seconds. That's awesome. I didn't believe it when I first heard it, but... Look at that! That's good. Subscribe also? I mean, that was pretty impressive. God.
Number 5, the Tlinkali. These are CR5 neutral evil monstrosities, typically found in the desert. The elevator pitch for the Tlinkali is very simple. Centaurs, but scorpion instead of horse. They are a truly sinister creature that can spice up any stretch of desert travel in your campaign. Tlinkali are nomadic creatures that typically scavenge their supplies and hunt just about anybody for food that they consider weaker than them. When they do come across a superior predator, it challenges them as a society. They have to decide whether or not to try to fight to the death with this creature, leave their territory alone for good, or even join them and learn from them as supporters in their ranks. Tlinkali, for this reason, are sometimes seen as allies to dragons, purple worms, and so on. These creatures pack quite a punch in combat. Alone, they already have high HP and a poisonous, paralyzing stinger. And in groups, they are intelligent enough to have tactics and strategy. They can lay ambushes, they can do tactical retreats and rushes, they can smartly survey the battlefield and choose who in the party to target first. But where these creatures really come alive is how they raise their young. You see, when a Tlinkali kills somebody, typically it's only to eat them for food. But if eggs have recently been laid, the book says that they will keep them alive, chain them up somewhere in a dark den with the eggs where it won't be disturbed, and wait until the young hatch and can come out and eat that tied-up convict alive as their first meal, to give them fuel to get out of that den and survive their first few hours or days out in the desert alone. That's scary. If you're going to be using Tlinkali in your game, personally, I think it's a missed opportunity to not at least touch on this. And I think it sets up a perfect encounter opportunity for a rescue mission of sorts. Your party runs into NPCs, or perhaps even is tracking down an NPC that they already know that has been captured by the Tlinkali in this way. They have to fight off adult Tlinkali that have caught wind of their whereabouts and are trying to stop them, while also having a certain amount of rounds to free the captors before they are eaten alive. This simple ticking clock is the kind of thing that Joe talked about in his last video, secondary combat objectives, which I highly recommend you check out. And who knows, if your campaign involves enough encounters with the Tlinkali, maybe they will even come to respect the party as superior predators, offering a very interesting roleplay possibility when the party decides how they want to respond to that. Do they reject the Tlinkali's offer to follow and support them, or do they see it as an advantage? Number 4 is the Coatl, a CR4 lawful good celestial, typically found in the desert as well. But as a social monster, a way to add complications and flavor to your campaign, I think the Coatl is unmatched as a lore keeper of sorts that your party needs to seek out. These flying celestial serpentine creatures were supposedly created long ago by a god so ancient that none even remember its name anymore. They were all created with a very specific purpose, and all of them treat this mission with top priority. The only time new Coatl are born is when one of the Coatl can sense, with its slight omniscience, that its own death will be coming soon, and it won't have time to complete its tasks. It creates a young with another Coatl in an elaborate dance, it gives the mission to the young, and then it passes on peacefully. Pretty much every stat the Coatl has is designed for getting away from a fight, not surviving one. They have a fly speed of 90, they have a very high AC, they have disguise abilities, basically anything that would let them barrier themselves off from combat before it even began. With true sight and a shielded mind ability that prevents any mind reading or scrying, they also create a social challenge, particularly if the party is trying to get information out of them. They won't be able to do it with any loopholes. And as what is apparently a running theme in this list, these creatures also have telepathy. Apparently, I think telepathy is overlooked. I didn't know that when I made this list. One last interesting trait about the Coatl is their inability to lie due to their celestial nature, something that if the party finds out, they could certainly use in trying to gain information from them. They can tell half-truths, they can lead people to false conclusions, but they cannot outright lie. So perhaps the Coatl would be a natural ally to the party, but for a creature who's been alive for hundreds or even thousands of years, can sense that its death is going to be coming in the next 50, and still has a mission to uphold that they have sworn to their god, interacting with anybody outside of that plan is an absolute risk that they would avoid at all costs, making sighting any Coatl at all an incredibly rare thing. So in an encounter, I think the Coatl is best served being the subject of an exploration quest, not a boss battle. They are the final encounter of a long journey of gathering information and digging through ancient locations and uncovering tombs. But when the party gets to that final room, rather than fighting the Coatl, they are asking it for information, and they will need to fight just as desperately, but in a social way, in order to gain whatever information this Coatl has been safeguarding for hundreds of years. To gain that favor, a Coatl also makes a very natural quest giver. For example, maybe the Coatl happens to know where an Arch-Lich's phylactery lie, but he doesn't want to give that information to just about anybody. So the party's going to have to do something that benefits the Coatl's divine mission first in order to gain that information. At number 3, we have the Rakshasa, a CR13 lawful evil fiend, typically found in urban settings. Okay, look, calling the Rakshasa overlooked or underrated, I get it, it's a bit of a stretch. They're pretty common monsters, but I want to argue that they should be right up there with vampires, beholders, liches, your mom, as big bads that can hold down an entire campaign, not just an interesting trick or added layer that can be thrown into an otherwise demonic flavored setting. Firstly, the Rakshasa is the perfect A-villain puppet master of a campaign that has powerful minions at his side that can serve as more traditional boss battles. The Rakshasa is a creature that prefers to get its fiendish delights through the long game and through games of deception and politics. It might be disguised as a very powerful merchant or noble, or it might kill somebody and assume their place with its disguise. And from here, it can just pull strings in the background for months or years, changing the landscape of the setting of your campaign to its whim. With their incredibly high deception and insight skills as well, they might be able to approach the party before they even know it and gain as much information as they would like, using it against them at a later date. This creates a wonderful cumulative effect where halfway through a campaign, you can drop to the players that 3 of the NPCs that they've been working with this whole time were all one fiend, getting information from them. And then there's immunities. CR13 might seem a little high for this creature when you first look at the stat block, but then you realize that if your party is under level 13, they basically have no way of hurting this thing. It is immune to any kind of magic it wishes to be of 6th level or lower. Physical damage that is non-magical basically does nothing to it as well. Any low-level party that is thrown against a Rakshasa is going to be forced to approach situations with their mind rather than their might. And then will have the satisfaction of eventually fighting the monster with might toward the end of your campaign. And then there's the Rakshasa's weakness, something that I think ties the whole creature together and just begs to be in a high fantasy hero's journey. It has a very specific damage vulnerability, piercing damage, wielded by a good aligned creature with a magical weapon. Oddly specific, sure, but this sets up a perfect final stretch for your campaign. Only somebody who has sought out a specific divine blade, and only somebody who has cleansed their soul of all sin can properly fight the Rakshasa. This is something that you can build up to throughout an entire campaign that will have wonderful catharsis by the end. And like many fiends, the Rakshasa is not truly dead if killed on the material plane. It will simply reform. which means that the final battle of your Big Bad Rakshasa campaign will need to be in the 9 hells itself to truly kill the beast. And the killing blow, you could do a great thematic thing where the paladin of the party that has righted his wrongs and found a mythic blade left by his family thousands of years ago finally gets to deliver the killing blow. That's why the Rakshasa, to me at least, might be right up there with some of the classic S-tier big bad villains. But as for an encounter, let's talk about something you could do along the way. Let's talk about a little bit of impersonation. Let's say that a mayor has been captured and taken to a crypt, and they know that the Rakshasa's probably behind it. They fight through all the undead, they see some fiends. By the time they get to the end, though, 2 mayors. There's 2 mayors waiting for them, both of them insisting that they're the real one, and the other one is the impersonator. This is a way, I think, to use the Rakshasa's true strengths to its fullest capabilities. It is a social challenge more than a combat challenge. And when the Rakshasa is discovered, it will, of course, snap its fingers, summon a boss battle-worthy creature, and teleport away, only to mess with the party again at a later date. At number 2, we have the Hook Horror, a CR3 neutral monstrosity typically found in the Underdark. At first glance, this bird, beetle, mole amalgamation thing is deceptively simple. It chases after you, it claws you, and eats you alive. And that alone would be fun. But some of the details that have been given to the Hook Horror make it incredibly interesting, and I believe worthy of the number 2 spot on this list. Firstly, there's their language. Hook Horrors use their bony limbs to scrape and click along walls, or even on their own shells to communicate with one another. Markings can be left behind. These are mostly unintentional, I think, since the creatures are blind, but perhaps the party can learn to interpret them over time, or at least know that it's a sign that the creatures are near. But the horror of Hook Horror, in my opinion, comes from the fact that this communication is said to travel for miles due to its unique frequency. It can be interpreted from very, very far away by other Hook Horrors. This means that, similar to a Mind Flayer, if the party is spotted by one Hook Horror, they might as well be spotted by hundreds, as all of them have a chance to receive communication that says, "Food over here." Then there's the Hook Horror's blindsight ability, which I think begs you to run them like the Garador from Resident Evil 4 or like a Clicker from the Last of Us series, listening out for the party, clicking along walls, cawing for them, waiting for the slightest error in movement or judgment to spring upon them. With their language, their blind sight, and their 30-foot climb speed and ability to dangle from ceilings by their hooks, you have a very distressing creature on your hands, and one that can come in probably endless numbers if its communication travels far enough to others in the vicinity. Like a lot of my favorite monsters, the Hook Horror has some staying power. Anytime your party hears those distinctive clicks and clacks of the Hook Horror language, they're going to be wondering if they were spotted, wondering for how many miles around them they might be there. They might get an exposure to the Hook Horrors in one encounter and then plunged into absolute darkness in close quarters with them the next, now fully aware of what these creatures are capable of and stuck in a terrible situation. Using these creatures in an encounter, I prefer personally to use them in overwhelming numbers in a dark environment with lots of objects around for the party to make noise, and lots of side paths for them to potentially divert the creatures. In direct combat, of course, they can be fun, but I think the Hook Horrors work even better if the party is trying to escape. If they keep going into a dungeon, only seeing evidence of the Hook Horror but never running into one, and then when they're finally at the farthest back room, they hear them starting to descend in, and they realize they have to make it all the way back out without getting ripped to shreds by hundreds of these things. I think these enemies work best when you feel that no matter how far away they are from sight, there's a chance that they're listening to you, and that they're talking to each other about their next move. And that feeling that you can create at the table is why they are my number 2. And finally, my number 1. At number 1, we have the Balhaneth, a CR11 chaotic evil aberration that's typically found in coastal environments. Well, a unique environment, would you look at that? Here we are at the top of the overlooked monsters list with a monster that I forgot existed for years. How fitting. Until I threw it into a one-shot I was running and realized that it was one of the most fun I'd ever had running a boss encounter. The Balhanith is a sinister, surprisingly intelligent creature that is the perfect B-villain for your big bad to throw in the party's way the next time they descend into a dungeon or a coastal depth. They are in some sense just a typical predator animal, like many other on this list, looking for a meal. But they have ways of messing with the party that offer a lot of roleplay opportunity. And dare I say it, they also have telepathy. They also have telepathy. This mouth and tentacles that hangs from a ceiling, that seems rather unintelligent at first, has a telepathic ring that goes out for an entire mile away from its main layer. And within that mile, not only can it directly communicate with your party, it can sense their deepest desires. And it can use this to speak to them directly, to create hallucinations, and to change the terrain of its lair to befit that desire. In this way, it often lures its prey by tricking them into thinking they'd found an oasis of sorts, causing them to run in without their usual senses of defense up. And when they do, it's able to snatch them up, teleport away, turn invisible, and do a lot of other nasty things in order to make sure it gets that kill. The mind games that this creature plays can of course be an incredible roleplay opportunity for your party. Perhaps some of them see through it and some of them don't. Perhaps they learn about each other's backstories and things are forced out of the closet because of the visions that they receive. And once combat is reached, of course, this thing is very fun. Its tentacles automatically grapple targets, and once those targets are grappled, it can do a bonus action bite attack on them that is just sinister. The speed and ferocity with which these things can pick up one of the party members and then get away from everyone else out of sight and out of mind is just threatening. It's threatening, okay? It's threatening. And for an encounter with the Balhanith, I think you need to run it in its lair and take full advantage of the hallucinatory terrain it is capable of. I think you as the DM should take opportunities in the sessions before to learn what some of these hallucinations could be based on tidbits about the character and their past and their flaws and desires. And then you can even have a little bit of fun of bending the layer so that it's a little bit different to each party member, based on the things that they want and need. From here, you have not only the cat and mouse game of trying to track down this teleporting invisible tentacle monster that's eating your friend, you also have a distrust of the terrain. Is that chest of gold actually a stalactite that's going to hurt you? Is this bridge actually just a gap that you're going to fall down? Is this pool of water a pool of acid? Perhaps you won't know until you interact with them. You might think you're taking cover or getting an item that's going to benefit you, only to be falling further and further into this monster's trap. Not only will this boss fight be incredible and dangerous and fun as hell, I think like a lot of good D&D monsters, it offers an opportunity for excellent storytelling in the aftermath. How does the party deal with the visions they saw? What does it say about themselves? What do they learn about one another that can go forward in the rest of the campaign? And there you have it. There's 10 overlooked monsters. That's the end of the list because we did all 10 of them. This is an outro where I tell you other stuff we do on the channel. We live play D&D campaigns on Twitch. 2 of them are run by Joe. 1 is run by John. Those are played on Twitch, and then they end up here on YouTube. We also have advice and topic videos like these. We have map making. We have shorts. We got comedy stuff. We got all sorts of things related to D&D. And there's going to be a lot of things coming in the next couple months related to Kingdoms and Castles, an original trading card game that we are developing based on the homebrew of the world of Illica that we run here on this channel. So stay tuned for all of that, and I'll see you next month for another weird take.